Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a show where we talk about HR and the future of work. I'm your host, Dr. Veldsman, and we've got an exciting episode and an extremely exciting guest lined up. And we'll be talking about how do we help organizations scale and grow over time. Joining me today is Dr. JooBee Yeow. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. JooBee, welcome to the show. What brings you to the HR Dialogues?
Thank you, Dieter. Well, I am very excited. I've always been a fan of AIHR, so I am really pleased to be in this conversation.
It's lovely, and thank you so much for agreeing to share your wisdom with us today. And I think to set the tone, so many great words that describe you when I look at your profile and some of our previous conversations. Things that come to mind: entrepreneur, advisor, writer, systems engineer, somebody that loves to democratize knowledge. I know you've got a really, really good newsletter that also runs that I also follow and definitely read and dive into to get some of the pieces of wisdom and nuggets on a frequent basis. Can you share a story with us in your own career that was some of the best advice that you've ever received, something that's stuck with you up to now?
There is one that really stuck with me for a while. I remember my manager telling me this: if you want to do my job one day, it's time for you to leave. I probably should give a little bit of context. So after getting my PhD in leadership development, I joined a company called Duke Corporate Education.
Yes.
It was ranked number 1 in the world by Financial Times for leadership development. And at that time, I cannot imagine ever leaving that job. It was my dream job. So in a short period of time, I gained a lot of breadth of exposure and experience, and I get to work with FTSE 200 clients like Google, Rolls-Royce, Bosch, and I was exposed to so many thought leaders that I look up to, like Dan Ariely, who wrote Predictably Irrational. And I also get to work with Mick, my manager, who gave me that advice. He's a managing director who's highly sought after by our clients. He's well known for designing high-impact, immersive leadership development experiences. So obviously, when I grow up, I want to be him. And he knows that. And during our career conversation, around 2 years into my role, he said, "JooBee, if you want to do what I do and develop leaders better, I think it's time to leave your consultant job and step into the shoes of those you design for." And it was the best advice I received, because throughout my career, I made sure that I step into 3 different types of shoes: the shoe of a business operator, so not a consultant looking from outside in, an HR leader, a manager leading teams, function, and business. I probably would not have left my dream job if it was not for him, because it is tempting to do more of what we do, especially when we're comfortable, and follow a very narrow career path. And my squiggly career of stepping into multiple different shoes does add depth and breadth to my experience. And now it is a full circle. I'm back in an educator role. And looking back, I am really glad that Mick kicked me out of my comfort zone.
No, I think that's fantastic advice for anyone listening. I've always found intentional career decisions to give you exposure. And I love the way you put it around being able to step into other people's shoes and look at sometimes the same context or environment, but from different perspectives. I think it makes us so much more robust and so much better in terms of making sure that we provide good advice, good insight, and give insight with context. JooBee, before we jump into our topic today, what do you love about HR and what do you love about the HR environment?
I get asked this a lot, and I think the best way to say this is I love problem solving. And I remember when I moved from engineering to HR, and a friend of mine said, "So you move from solving problems where you know 1 + 1 = 2 to solving problems where 1 + 1 could equal to 3, 11, 52, or anything."
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, because it keeps life exciting, because people are not predictable.
Yeah, I think that's where the joy also comes in, right? There's so many different moving parts, and something that motivates me in the HR environment is definitely that complexity of problem solving that you deal with, and that triangle of people, process, and technology that you have to bring around the table to be able to guide that. When you and I caught up a lot of conversations we find today is around how businesses grow over time. When we invest in businesses, what does that mean and how can we set businesses up for success? All of us, when we look at some of the statistics and some of the research, we see these statistics around how many businesses fail in the first 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And very often it's quite a negative story. And I sometimes believe that when we dive into that, yes, we talk about what some of the business challenges were, not understanding the needs, not understanding the markets. But sometimes I feel there's other things at play. And that's really why I would love to explore with you when we work in startup, scale up environments. How do businesses grow and the role of HR and how that evolves and some of the pitfalls that we do need to think about if we do find ourselves in some of those environments? So I think to get us started, we can acknowledge that scaling a startup is definitely a non-linear journey. There's not necessarily a playbook for it, even though I think a lot of people claim that there is, and it's marked by significant step changes. So can you give us a bit of insight into how does an organization know that they're ready for some of these transitions that we talk about?
I love that you talk about this, there's no playbook. And I think both of us see it quite similarly, where we want to look at the first principle of the problem rather than assuming that is the same solution for everything. So to your question, I think we will zoom out and look at the whole startup scaling journey. There are usually broadly three distinct stages.
Yeah.
And I use Notion Capital's term start, build, scale. There are multiple different terms, but usually these three stages. And when startup transition from one stage to the other, also known as the inflection point, there are two, I think, typical signals that we can look out for to indicate this transition, and they are revenue and headcount. So if we look at the three different stages, the start stage is where startup is trying to find their product market fit by identifying a meaningful problem to solve and building a scalable product for a narrow group of customers that can eventually generalize to a very large market. At this stage, at the start stage, startups are growing their revenue between 0 to 3 million, and typically the headcount is no more than 50. So that's one signal. And then when you have your product market fit, your startup transition from start to build stage, where the focus now is how to get the product to the customers as effectively as possible and grow revenue from 3 to 30 million. And then the headcount here is typically around 50 to 400, depending on the type of business model. And on the third stage is when you have your go-to-market fit and you're moving to the scale stage, where the startup is focusing on launching new products or entering into multiple new geos or markets to scale revenue from 30 to 100 million, and your headcount is typically between 400 to over 1,000. So revenue and headcount are two signals of startups' inflection point, where this business needs to transition to its next stage.
I think that's very helpful. Yeah, I've also seen a lot, whenever we talk about organizational life cycles and the challenges that organizations need to solve, I think where this really helps us is for business leaders to also understand, but what are the tensions that I need to manage along each of these different inflection points? And they do change over time. I'm pretty enthusiastic and passionate about the organizational identity space. And it's very similar to the phases that you've described now that talks about the fact that, who are we? Why are we? What are we? It kind of needs to be solved and resolved at different points for the organization to reach those growth targets in terms of headcount, as well as then on the revenue side. Something that you said that I do think is quite important is to look at these two in collaboration with each other. I've seen some organizations make that mistake where they only look at one of the two indicators and then they typically start lagging. And I think, unfortunately, the revenue one is the one that they look at, but they forget that there's a people side of things that also need to start progressing, quite a little bit more. So I want to ask you this question around, so how does HR strategy changes along, let's call it this curve, along these different inflection points, over time, and what have you seen work in that environment?
Yeah. So when startups transition from one stage to the other, as you mentioned, it's not linear. It is a significant step change. And it's a step change in terms of how the business need to operate. So if we look at the start stage, where startups are still finding their product market fit, the organization and people need to operate flexibly. And at the build stage, where startup need to get their product to their customer effectively, the org needs to be structured and systematic in order to get that repeatable results.
Mm.
And then at the scale stage, where startups need to launch new products, enter into multiple new markets, the org then needs to be able to manage highly complex external variables and internal systems. With this in mind, with this evolution of how organization and business need to operate, that naturally feeds into the HR strategy in terms of how we are structured, the capabilities needed, the automation of processes and system, how we use data, and the principles of how we work, which these six things are what I call the six foundations of organization.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a moment, and I'd love your view on it, right? Because that transition between agile startup just starting out and that next phase of, let's call it formalization, right? Where organizations have to start running on repeatable processes. There has to be some controls in place. I've often found that HR typically starts also coming into the fold with regards to that. And I sometimes wonder whether that's not why we carry this label as, oh, the people that are coming in to stop or to inhibit certain things. And the hurdles that we put in place is actually there to build foundations for future scalability, right? But if I'm sitting in that environment, it does require the disruption of the current culture and how some of those things are going to shift, right? So how does HR deal with this tension, because you are there to help the business grow, but you also then need to rein in certain elements to almost guide that growing up process, and enable these different inflection transitions?
The mistake that we tend to make, and I'm not saying we as HR, we as the business itself, all business leaders included here, is we solve the problem when the problem is there. So when you hit the inflection point, that's when you solve the problem. And by then it comes as a surprise to everyone. And like you say, the people who are brought in to, stifle the flexibility or something like that, which is not the case. What I always say is this is a journey that is the first principle of the journey is the same. There will be step change, minimum 3. And it's not a surprise. But what we don't do is we don't communicate this really, really early on so that people know that this evolution is coming. So I'll give an example.
Yep.
When I was with Notion Capital last year, what I absolutely love as a VC, and they are an operator VC. So they know this, they have operated in this environment, and they invest quite early on as well. And when they invest, once they invest in a portfolio company, they will partner very closely with them and help them look at the bigger picture, not just solving the problem right now. And to prepare, because they know that the leadership are the one who will bring the people along the journey. The people are the one who will be along the journey to build the business, to help them understand the bigger picture. And what that means is people are given a choice. If I know in 1 or 2 years' time, when we hit this revenue and when we start to build, it means there's more repeatable processes. It means that it's more specialization. And people can choose either to go, yes, I want to grow my next stage of career, and therefore I start to develop myself now rather than be surprised at that point. Or people will make a choice and go, you know what, I love the crazy chaos of, early stage. And I think I'll call out a name of one of our HR leader that many people know, Maria Campbell. She's very, very aware of, what she loves. She is the start person. Yep. And she will tell you she will do that repeatedly. The moment it gets to build stage, she'll go back and redo it again. Yeah. And same for me, I love the build stage. The moment it hits scale, I might see you again. I'll go back and repeat the same. So I think giving people the bigger picture early on will make that change that needs to happen more predictable, because people like certainty and they can do something about it sooner.
I think there's two things for me that really stand out about what you've also mentioned. And I've also seen this in some of the organizations I've been involved in, right? I love the fact that we are able, and I'm going to be a little bit blunt about this, but to treat people like grown-ups and tell them what's really happening within the business and the decisions that they need to make there. Because I very often think, and I've never been a fan of, smaller early stage organizations selling this dream that everybody will be along for the entire ride for. Yes, you will have people that stick with you for a very long period of time. But to your point, there are also certain people that enjoy a particular season within an organization. I did a lot of work at some point in mergers and acquisitions because I
Mhm.
loved the complexity and the chaos. The moment that things got put together, people was established, the things were starting to run. I'm a terrible maintainer. So I'm one of the worst people to do that because I will break it again to see if I can put it together in a different way, right?
Love it.
But but that was a very big insight for me in my career. So I've always tried to plan my own career moves, regardless of whether it was small business or big business, to say at some stage, once I've put certain elements in place, I'm no longer the best leader for this environment. I'm no longer an employee that actually gets energy out of the things that we're starting to do. And I think it's okay. I think it's okay if you're in an environment where leaders also tell you that story and are very
Mm.
visible about how these progressions are starting to occur, because at some point we do need something different.
I cannot agree more. And it's really interesting. I did think about this. I mean, we know this, but why do we not do it, as founders or leaders
Mm,
in startup? And like you say, right, we think people we want actually a lot of founders really, really want people who are with them early in the journey to be with them
mm,
throughout the whole journey. It is really with the best intention, but when when we're not open about it too many times it comes as a surprise.
mm.
Even if it is an option, but I hope that you will,
Yeah.
it still, create a clearer picture that only one path, that if it didn't happen, it let everyone down.
Yeah, I also think, I had a discussion with a founder of a business, which, to use your terminology, is typically in that second build stage, right? They're formalizing quite a few things. They've now also grown their head count up to a point where our conversation was about the fact that as a founder, I understand that this is your idea, your baby, you're passionate about this, you eat, sleep, and breathe this.
Mhm.
You actually now have employees, to be very honest, that it's just a job for them. They like the job, they might love the environment that they are currently in, but it remains a job for them. And to have that transition to then be able to say, but the relationship is now starting to change, I also need to put in some other structures there as well. So I think it's such a fascinating thing. Organizations are living systems and living things that keep on changing and have to be adapted. And JooBee, I want to get back to HR's
Mm.
role in all of this, right?
Okay.
Because I think there's such a strong underappreciated role at times. And to use the example you used earlier, very often we do things retrospectively. And
Mm.
I've seen that, and we've actually just done a lot of research at the moment on how do HR teams develop and grow over time. So if we have to talk about things like headcount and specialization, and the trend that we are seeing, and I can understand why it's the case, is that business grows and then HR runs a little bit to try and catch up behind. So you're almost always under pressure on the one end, and you're
Mhm.
almost always under resourced, because it's like, we'll get to the HR. We'll get to the HR model. Don't worry about that. We'll get to the HR workforce plan. We first need to, and then, there's a list of things that first need to happen as part of that. So, what should the priorities be for HR during these different stages? And how does HR start to think differently about their role and their contribution?
Let's break it into a couple of parts. So let's look at the business,
Yeah.
because it's also about the work that we do, right? And how do we choose to prioritize that? So, as I mentioned earlier, when startup transition from one stage to the next, they need to operate differently, which required a change in the six foundations of the organization: people, strategy, structure, capabilities, data, processes, system, and ways of working. So, HR work with the business to help them transition with these six foundations. So, in terms of looking at how we support the business, I think sometimes HR over index on a couple of foundations we're probably more comfortable with, which is
Mm,
capabilities or ways of working,
yeah.
while neglecting the other four. What that means is when it's imbalanced, then you're always you start to have fires,
Mm,
and then you're playing catch up. So that's one part. But we ourselves is also part of an organization, a function within an organization. So we need to also change our six foundations, which is our strategy, our structure, our capability, how we use data, how we work with process and system and ways of working. So the our own function to level up all these six foundations as well, and not operate based on the foundation of the previous stage.
I really like the fact that you talk about leveling up. And I think the divide is very helpful to think about what is the business going through and how do I equip, enable, what is happening within the business. I'm a very big supporter of the idea that HR is also a business in itself. And as such, with any other function, you need to think about why we are who we are, what are we currently busy with, and how should we also evolve ourselves to the next level. And I think a mistake I've seen a lot of people make is they think about that in a very functionally driven way, which I don't necessarily believe is always the right way to go about it, right? And
Yep.
if that is the case, I think we also at times have this perception of it needs to be aligned to what the challenge is in the business that we're trying to solve, which immediately puts you on the back foot, right? So at the beginning, let's be very honest. Most businesses start out, and when HR comes in, they're like, oh my word, there's so much governance and legislative and compliance things to sort out. That is now our job to be able to do that. Then we go on to the systems of work. Okay, but hang on, the processes need some work. We can do things differently. Recruitment, we need to bring the people. Learning, we need to give them the skills as part of that. And I sometimes wonder if that functional mode of thinking actually restricts us a little bit in what our contribution could be as part of where the business finds itself. You spoke earlier about leadership development, and I want to also think a little bit there because I think that's sometimes the missing thing, right? We don't spend enough time guiding this founder team, leadership team, management team that's been put in place during that stage is around how are we going to navigate, this monster into the future, and what does that mean, and how should they also be changing?
So if we look at the picture that you just painted, right, we look at HR from a functional perspective. And we think we are accountable for that. Actually, we are accountable for three things: the business success, the people success, and HR team success. So, which means, if we are, so I'm going to assume we're talking about HR leader that's leading the function.
Yeah.
So, which means you're accountable for the business. These three parts are all interconnected, right? You need to, if we look at the business success, we need to know what is the biggest priority. And that priority, how is it being brought to life? And that is the 6 foundations I talk about. So we're not talking about capability of one software engineer in engineering. We're talking about the organizational capability. And that can be, it could be a whole technical capability within tech. And like you say, the senior leadership capability is one that is really important as well, because they are the one who's setting the direction. So when I step into a HR leader role, as I mentioned, the third priority is HR team, right? No, sorry, rephrase. Not in order of priority, one of the three.
We'll see them as a triangle that all carry equal priority. Yeah.
So I will always make sure that my team are operational as quickly as possible. If that means hiring a number 2, it means filling the gap, because they still need to do, we as HR still need to run the HR function. So that either I or, and usually this will be a partnering team, or my people partners, us partnering very quickly with the business leadership, because that is the change agent that we need to enable to move the business forward. So we might want to do that. I think a lot of HR leaders would want to do that, but all your other priorities are pulling you to do it because it's more burning and it becomes urgent. But if we don't make sure that the foundation there are strong, then we are not able to do what we should be doing.
Something I hear quite a lot when speaking to HR leaders in that type of environment, I hear the words, when we get there, or if we solve the following, we will, to be able to get there. And I think what you're also talking about, which I really like,
not linear.
is to flip it the other way around, right? Is to say, what foundations do we need so that we can? And what I mean by that is it's just to be able to say, when businesses grow, yes, they're unique and there's context and they're complex in their own right, but there are certain similarities that we know that we are going to have to solve for. So how as HR do we think about them slightly more proactively and set ourselves up to be able to do that? Because to your point, if I'm coming into an organization and there are compliance and legal risks that I do need to sort out, somebody needs to do that. But somebody on the other side also needs to start thinking about what is that next piece going to look like? How do we partner with the leaders? How do we think a little bit more strategically about the talent that we're going to require in future phases? I sometimes wonder if we, and I'm going to call it just for the purpose of our conversation, operational slash transactional HR. I think we invest in that really early, which is important. We need to get that right. But I'm wondering if there's not a secondary investment that sometimes we miss a little bit, and we should try and get that earlier into the life cycle. That piece around thinking about leadership, the org development side of things.
So I talk about HR has
Mm,
4 values.
mm,
The first one is no matter what is our bread and butter, and that is HR operation, making sure that day to
great.
day HR works. So the business is running. The second one is to drive the business to achieve its goal now. What you need to achieve in the next 12 months, whether it's 20% growth, etc. So drive the delivery of the strategy. This is where we partner with the business, make sure we have the right talent, etc., etc. The third one is, are we able to look forward into 2 to 3 years time and build things today that can get the business there? And then at the top is scale, which is having the time to think about everything you do is about 10xing. So you're not creating work for your future self. If we look at it in a pyramid, it is in order of priority. This one is in order of priority because it is if your payroll is broken and people are not being paid, nothing else matters. So if we don't build the foundation of that level, it's very hard for us to move up to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And not only that, as much as we might go, we really should look into the future. More and more people come into the organization, which means your operational work becomes more and more, and you get more and more stuck at that level. Hence, particularly in startup, where time is of essence because there is there are specific targets and a timeline that startup need to meet their goal. The first priority is actually to automate as soon as possible, streamline and automate, rather than going, we'll do it, hire more people so that I can focus there. Actually, you need to automate and streamline so that no matter how big the business grow, it will never pull you back from the work that you're doing, whether it's driving business strategy or building for the future. It's a very slippery slope, this operational level.
No, but you make such a valid point, right? And I definitely take to heart the point that you make around how do you not create work for your future self? Because I've been extremely guilty of that, right? In terms of saying, I know, but for now, let's just do it this way, do the process with this workaround, etc. And I think to change that mindset to say, how do I actually not increase workload as I go along, but how do I start making things easier and easier?
So I'm very big fan of guardrails and boundaries because then it forces you to think outside the box. So typically what will happen in a HR team where your business grow, one of the team that will grow is the HR ops because more operation work. So the moment I join a team, they are very clear. So I always have 4 teams. So you have people partnering, talent partnering, HR ops, and your, I call it people product development. So your project team. The HR ops is the one team that I say will not have more than 5 people ever.
Wow.
And which means when you put that boundary down, the leader will go, right, what are the type of HR ops people that I will hire versus, just HR ops, because I will not have any more headcount. JooBee told me that. And I will have more and more work. How do I now leverage technology? How do I make sure the system, the process that I put in doesn't accidentally drown me in my team? So that boundary actually works out really, really well in the many teams that I have built, which you will have a very different HR ops profile to be in that team.
I also believe, good HR operational people are underappreciated and under-celebrated in organizations. I sometimes think that they are the best problem solvers, innovators, that the most creative in terms of how to apply resources. But I do think that not just throwing resources at a problem, it comes back to my point around the fact that when you grow an HR team, there also then should be designated steps that you go through around where your priorities are also going to shift. I once worked with a leader in this type of environment, and one of the biggest things I learned from him was to say, I only need to worry about these 6 things now. And I said, I don't really care what's happening beyond these different 6 things, because in the stage that we are in, these 6 things are the things that makes us successful. The other things for now, other people's responsibilities to deal with. If they do come to me, something is going extremely wrong with where we are on our journey there. So, what are
Mhm.
some of the mistakes that HR makes when dealing with the business during these transitions?
Let's take a scaling startup.
Mm,
What will happen is typically leaders are homegrown,
mm,
and many times many of them don't have the experiences. And one of the things that HR might do, to be mindful not to do, the mistakes that we might do, is we do it for the leaders or do it to the leaders. What I mean by that, so they're solving the problem for the managers rather than coaching them to do it. Or we launch things to them and not co-creating as much as we could if this is something that they need. We think, you need to do one-to-one weekly. Do they really need to do one-to-one weekly?
mm,
So the doing to them and for them
mhm,
is I would say is a mistake that is not scalable for us, as well as not holding them accountable
mm.
for their, what I always believe is enable them to either succeed or fail
Yeah.
and take accountability for that. And we will always then do it with them. We
Mm,
will be standing side by side with them, coach them, guide them, advise them, challenge them, but not do it for them or to them.
mm,
So that is one. The other one would be, so that is to the leaders. I think to the founder. I
mhm,
think particularly founder is a huge impact and driving force of a lot of things that's happening in startup. And we've the same principle apply. We need to do it with the founder. And of course, founder being founder, they're owner of the business, they're the CEO. They say jump, we say how high.
mhm.
And we need to be very mindful. There's a reason why founder hire us, because they want our perspective. They want us to be their thinking partner, challenge partner. And it's not about, never do what they ask you to do. It's about having a thorough conversation of, is this the right thing to do?
I sometimes think we overstep our boundary and our guardrail as HR to try and be helpful and to try to have a lot of impact in usually the lives of managers that have not dealt with any people management responsibilities before. Because I think a mistake we also make is time within business in a startup environment does not equate to skill set that I require in that particular phase. So I might not be ready for a managerial position just because the function that I find myself in now requires a manager does not mean it's me that now just steps into that position. And I think that sometimes also leads towards the fact that HR oversteps boundaries. And some advice that I've given some business leaders in the past to say, if you want HR to manage people, then you need one HR person for every single manager that you're going to appoint. If you
Yep.
don't want that, then people managers need to manage their people, and
Mhm.
HR needs to play the equip and enable role, facilitate the process, create the environment, create the structures that sit around that to equip and to enable those people. Your point around the founder, I think, is so crucial for people listening today to really take to heart. You've been hired for a particular point of view. And somebody once gave me the advice, similar to you earlier in your career, to say, always remember that I hired you to think, not just to do. Question me, query me, ask why, and help me make the right decision. Sometimes it won't be the one that you've brought to the table, and that is perfectly okay.
If you're a HR leader and you just join a business, many times there are preconception of what HR is.
Mm,
And we forget to recalibrate the whole organization and our stakeholder of what to expect of us. And that simple recalibration to go, we're building the HR team, or I'm the new HR leader, whatsoever. This is how we would like to work with you, and be clear on the rules of engagement, if you like.
mhm,
And that's one thing I do a lot, which I don't realize I do until you see the challenges faced by um, others. Is that clarity?
mhm.
We will not do this for you. We will not do this to you. We will make sure we engage you this way, and we will be with you when you're doing this. And and repeat that message. That's really important. You say one time, they will forget. Repeat that message, because that is how you work with the business.
Mm.
So very simple.
But so crucial, right? I mean, it's like entering into any new relationship. And I'm going to use a horrible metaphor, right? When you start out dating, there's kind of these flexible rules, but
Mhm.
over time, you need to tighten them. And especially if somebody's been in a previous relationship where things have worked in a particular way, it's
Mhm.
going to be different now. So, what are the
Absolutely.
new rules of the game, and what is acceptable for both of us and what's not? And I think also aligned to that, then stick to your own rules. Because I've also seen that where HR professionals do put down the rules. And
Mhm.
then the very first time when they are challenged to say, no, that's not really what I'm here to do, they
Yep.
say, oh, I'm still new. They'll learn how to work with me.
Yes.
You kind of need to have a zero tolerance policy
Consistency.
yeah, to be
Consistency.
there. JooBee, I want to ask you a difficult question, and then I'm going to start wrapping up for us. And it's one that I've seen quite a bit, right? When the business growth and the requirements of HR starts outstripping the HR individuals that have been part of the business up to that point in time and have helped the business through some of those initial phases. And I very often feel businesses make two mistakes. On the one end, they make the mistake either of not bringing in somebody from an HR point of view outside that has the type of experience that's going to equip and enable them. Or on the other side, they do bring somebody in, but they don't manage that expectation with the team that remains around why they are not the individual that's going to be calling the shots within HR. So,
Mhm.
what do we do in this situation when we do reach that point?
I will circle back to the answer that I said previously, um, which is it always happens
Yeah,
when the problem is in front of you or the challenge is in front
yeah,
of you. And if, not only HR, but any other function as well, ideally, could we create this awareness of the journey as early as possible?
mm,
What do we expect of, HR leader at this stage and the next stage and the next stage? So that it won't come as a surprise if I don't meet the expectation, or I have time to grow to the level that is, or to the capabilities that's needed in the next level. So it's really, really start early
mm,
versus to that point in time, because nobody have never ever seen this scenario turn out well when it comes as a surprise. There's also a second point to this that I would highlight, and this might be a little bit painful to say.
mhm,
If any function should be aware of this is coming down the road, it will be the HR function, because we should know the evolution of the organization and the capability as the business grow. So it shouldn't technically come as a surprise. And we are the people who build
mm,
the capabilities model. Of course, if we only build for this stage, then we miss knowing what is coming the next stage. We are the people who built this, and we should be aware more than anyone else the capabilities that we need to grow into. So it is painful to say, but I think of all people, HR should be more aware than others and can manage that a little bit early, even if the founder didn't,
mm.
you know, tell the narrative of the journey of the scale up.
Yeah. To build on your point, I think there's also, if you understand right what we said at the beginning around your own preference and seasonality and skill set, I think as an HR professional, I think if you are not the right person for that next stage and the expectation has been managed, I think you can play such a critical role in making sure that the right person then actually joins that allows you to do what you are good at, or for you to be able to set up the business for success as you kind of steer into your next adventure. But I think it does require a bit of maturity, I think, from you as a professional. And I think it does require a very, very strong relationship with the founder that you do need to manage in the right way up to that particular point in time. So, JooBee, I can't believe we're already at this stage, but such great insights that you shared with us today. And I think a lot of very useful, very, very practical tips for our listeners to go and apply in their own environments. A couple of things maybe that stood out for me. First one is always be aware of where your business is at and what the challenges are that they are dealing with in terms of the different inflection points. Be very aware of the fact that as HR, I really like those 6 principles that we've bedded down in terms of that's really going to be important for you to get right at the different stages. Be aware that your role and your contribution also evolves as the business starts to change and start to evolve. And that's perfectly okay. But be proactive about that. See what is coming so that it doesn't act as a surprise when we do start to get there. Love the fact that we also spoke about the fact that you focus on business, but you also focus on people and you have to focus on HR itself and mature those 3 things collectively, not in order of priority, but collectively so that you set yourself up for success in the future. And I also liked really some of the pitfalls that you've highlighted that we do need to be aware of when we do enter these different environments, the guardrails we need to put in place, the clarity that we need to create around how are we going to engage with you as HR professionals and what really is our role and what should you be expecting of us as part of our contribution. JooBee, thank you so much for sharing all these fantastic insights with us. It was really been a pleasure to have you on the show. Where can people follow you and find out more about what you do in your business?
I think HR folks, we know we are on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I think that is definitely the main place. And thank you so much for having me, Dieter. And I really love the tough question that you asked.
Much appreciated. Everyone, have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the next episode of the HR Dialogues. Bye bye.